So now we have our first table adapter, the item table adapter, which allows our application to communicate with the item table in our database. It has the two methods, fill and get data, to execute the queries. One returns a new data table populated with the returned data, or you can choose to feed it an existing data table and then populate that with the returned data. You can also use table adapters to send updates from your application back to the database using the methods that you saw generated in the advanced options. If you work with previous versions of Visual Studio, you can consider a table adapter similar in concept to a data adapter. With previous versions of Visual Studio, ADO.NET data adapters were used for communicating between an application and a database. Table adapters are designer-generated components that improve upon the functionality of data adapters. A table adapter has a built-in connection object and the ability to maintain multiple queries. Right now we have one query. We'll be adding more queries and more data sets as we go along. Each of the queries that we add to the table adapter will be exposed as a public method, and you can simply call it like any other method or function in an object. Let's take a look at how the table adapter fits into the ADO.NET object model. The easiest way to do this is select View, Object Browser. Scroll down until you see System.data. Expand that node. As you can see, we have all the different managed providers for data sources, such as ODBC, OLADB, SQL, etc. As we said to you earlier, System.data has the core components inside ADO.NET. Expand this tab. If you don't already see the objects sorted by type, you can right-click on this and select Sort by Object Type. Now we can see all our objects sorted by type. We can see the classes at the top. If we scroll down, we can see that we have the data tables. If we open up the data table, we can see all the interfaces that it supports. The iSerializable interface allows us to serialize our data table and pass it as XML. One of the advantages of using ADO.NET is that it's a firewall-friendly format, meaning you can pass it over HTTP in a serialized format. Let's scroll down. As you can see, we also have a variety of different exceptions that we can handle. These exceptions are specifically typed for ADO.NET. So in your catch clause, you can work with a specific type of application to understand what happened in the database to cause an exception condition to occur. For example, missing primary key. We actually won't encounter this exception because we have identity seed automatically set on our objects. We can take a look at this by going into Server Explorer. If you open up Server Explorer window and expand the Inventory tab, expand Tables, and double-click on Item, this will automatically launch yet another tool called the Table Definition tool. You can also launch this by right-clicking on your table and selecting Open Table Definition. As we said earlier, we won't encounter the missing primary key exception because we have identity seed automatically set to populate. You can actually configure this and the primary key directly from Visual Studio. By right-clicking on Item ID, you can choose to remove or add a primary key. In this case, we actually have one added. You can also choose to add relationships. Here we can set relationships between different tables in our database. So as you see, we already have a couple foreign keys already set. We have one to link to item grouping and another to link to item image. If you want to take a look at this relationship, you can actually use this tool to understand how this database works. For example, to understand how a foreign key works, select the Tables and Columns specification and use the button next to it to actually launch the Table and Columns dialog box. Here you can see that a primary key table is item, and it uses item image as a foreign key table, matching both the item ID columns for both tables. Cancel out and close again. Also, in the Table Designer window, you also have column properties that you can peruse. So for example, for item ID, if we scroll down, you can see we have a computed column specification set. Expand this. You'll notice that we have deterministic set as well as an identity specification. Expand the identity specification. You'll notice that we can actually configure this to be identity, meaning a way to identify a unique record in our table. We can set the identity increment. In this case, we're starting from 1 and adding 1 each time. Therefore, our primary key will automatically auto-generate and auto-numerate so that we never have to worry about missing a primary key, as a primary key is a required field. If we look at the name field, for example, you see that there is no identity specification. Close this window. So you can use both the object browser and the Open Table Definition window at your leisure to understand what kind of database that you're working with and how to relate them to the ADO.NET object model. Let's go ahead and close the object browser.